Hi, I'm Jeff Miller.
I'm Anthony Navarro, and welcome to Talk Out Loud, where we share the LGBTQIA+ narrative one story at a time. On this episode of Talk Out Loud, we're here with Rodney Wilson. Rodney is an author, teacher, and the founder of LGBT History Month. Growing up in a small town in Missouri, the message he and others heard was that gays and lesbians were damaged goods and so dangerous that they should not be allowed in the classroom. But Rodney's thirst for knowledge and calling was louder, leading him to obtain multiple degrees in education and becoming a teacher. Then, a few years later, on a continuing education trip to Washington, D.C., he came across some history that changed his life forever. This led him to coming out to his students during a history lesson that forever changed the world. Let's hear Rodney's story.
Today we're joined by author, teacher, founder of LGBT History Month, and HuffPost advocate contributing writer, Rodney Wilson. Rodney, you are here with us for our first virtual podcast with Talk Out Loud, and we could not thank you enough for joining us today.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to be with both of you.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here today, Rodney. Thanks for wanting to be on the show.
So Rodney, Anthony and I both first wanted to thank you for all the advocacy work you've done. But first, we'd really like to get to know you a little bit better and for all our listeners to get to know you better. And I can't think of a better place than to start with your childhood and where you grew up and what shaped you and molded you into the person and advocate that you are today. Where are you from?
I was born in southern Missouri, about an hour and a half south of St. Louis in the mid-1960s. My mother and father were young parents. My mother was 18. My father was 20. Both had stopped their formal education prior to graduating from high school. My father never returned to education, but my mother did later go back and earned her GED and also an associate's degree at a community college. I'm at the northern end. Where I was born is at the northern end of the Ozark Range that goes through southern Missouri and then into northern Arkansas. And we were a poor, rural, white family. We lived in a very small home of about 650 square feet, one bathroom, one tiny closet. We never needed necessities like food or clothing, but we certainly did not have any luxuries of any kind. And primarily, I gained access to the world beyond my little town via television. We had 5 channels that we received over the air from St. Louis, the CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS affiliate, and then an independent station. So we had an antenna on top of the house, and I'd go up there and turn it around, and Dad would yell out the window whether the picture was better or not. I remember when we got color television. That was very exciting. I remember when we got a telephone in 1976 when I was 11 years old. That was very exciting. I followed the telephone man all around until he finally brought the phone into the house, and then my sister and I had to flip a coin to see who got to make the first phone call. So we were a family that was struggling economically. My father had some mental health issues that at that time were not well defined or well diagnosed. He had anxiety and depression and some phobias, but at the time, the diagnosis for these and the medical treatment for these sorts of ailments were quite primitive. So my dad had various struggles, and of course, that trickled down to the entire family. He was a good, kind, loving, decent man, but these mental health issues did cause certain moments of anxiety and consternation for me particularly, but I think for the family generally. My mother was and is a very strong woman. She's independent, very smart. She loved to read. I can still remember sitting in bed with her at night as she's reading Gone with the Wind or some other romance novel generally, and I could watch her eyes, how quickly they darted across the page, and it just seemed amazing to me. And she made certain that I had Dr. Seuss books, and she made certain that when Funk and Wagnalls finally came around to our small little town and offered one volume of their encyclopedia every week at the local IGA, that we got that one volume until we had the complete set. I can remember going through page by page by page every time we'd get that book, and it was just amazing. So that's where I was raised, in that small town of 2,500 people in Washington County, a county of about 25,000 people, very much in rural Missouri. Spent my entire life there. I went through K through 12 in that school district, graduated in 1983 from that school, and then decided actually that I wasn't going to do any more education, in part because I was a fundamentalist Christian at the time, and I really did believe that the end of the world was imminent, and I had more important things to do than seek more education. So I took a job at a Walmart store and worked there for 2.5 years until I decided it wasn't the right place for me. And at that point, I went back to a community college near my home, the one I'm currently working at, actually, and finished my 2-year degree there, and then moved on to a state university, finished my 4-year teaching degree, began teaching in 1990 at a suburban St. Louis high school. So that brings me up to about, I guess, 1990.
When you had those 5 stations, and also with the encyclopedia being brought into your home, was there a thirst like your mother had for information and knowledge and stuff like that? And if so, what did you find yourself being drawn to?
I was curious about everything, and I asked questions about everything. Those are stories my mother reminds me of. I think, yes, I always wanted to know what was going on in the world outside of mine. And in my high school, the local Rotary Club had a foreign exchange student program going. And my junior year in high school, they brought in an exchange student from Japan. And my senior year of high school, they brought in an exchange student from Denmark. And I went to them like a magnet because I wanted to know about people who lived outside the United States. I wanted to know about people who had seen and grown up in a different part of the world. So I was always seeking out people who were not like I was, people who were not raised in rural United States. And reading, of course, was my favorite pastime. I read all the time, anything I could get my hands on. I still remember my first trip to the public library and getting a library card and how proud I was to have that. So through reading and through television, I think those were the 2 avenues, because my family didn't travel. We didn't take vacations. I thought rich people owned luggage and rich people took vacations and rich people had telephones and all sorts of thoughts like that. So we didn't travel. So I learned about the world through PBS, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. We'd watch 60 Minutes on CBS on Sunday nights, CBS Sunday Morning on Sunday mornings. So that's how I began to learn about the world. And then when I went away to college, I also gravitated toward everyone who was different, everyone who came from a different locale. I had Japanese roommates throughout my undergraduate years as an intentional choice because I wanted to learn about their world and their lives and their languages and religions and cultures.
I'm curious, how was, as far as like culturally in your home, what was there any language used for people that were different, or was there any thought about, when you talk about, queer culture or anything like that for your family growing up?
Well, my father used the word queer in a derogatory fashion, of course, at that time. And interestingly, in 1969, when my father spent a couple of weeks in a psychiatric hospital, Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, which is one of the great hospitals, at the same time, Tennessee Williams, the great writer, was there on the same hall as my father. And my father would tell stories about every time when he had walked past the room that Tennessee Williams was staying in, he could hear him in there on his typewriter, just typing away all day long, typing away. And then my dad would throw out, of course, we knew he was queer. My dad had someone on his softball team who was the pitcher, a really good pitcher, I remember. And my dad warned me to stay away from him because Dad thought there was something a little queer about him. So my dad was very much a man of his generation. He was born in 1944, 1 year prior to the end of World War II. So he was a man of his generation. So we did not know gay people. And even as I think about it now, 1970s television, for example, Soap, which was that comedic take on daytime soap operas that aired in the evening, and Billy Crystal played a gay person on that program. I remember looking at him with both intrigue and also with anxiety, because I was sitting in my living room with my mother and father and my sister watching a gay character being portrayed on television and wondering and being intrigued by him and by his life. And then there were people on television at the time like Paul Lynde, for example, the Center Square and Hollywood Squares, Uncle Arthur on Bewitched. And truly, it didn't dawn on my mind that he was gay. I don't think it even dawned on my mind that Liberace was gay, for goodness sake. Because in the 1970s in rural America, you didn't expect that people were really gay. Certainly not people you allowed into your living room, either literally or via television.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about that intrigue and also like that nervousness. I've never heard anyone quite put it that way. And I remember in the 80s on PBS watching, I don't know if you ever saw that, the sitcom from the BBC, Are You Being Served?
Yes.
And when Mr. Jeffries would come out, and I was just like, that I guess even just now saying that, I get like a little bit of a sweaty palm still to this day. It's so funny. What I'm curious though is then, thanks for sharing about your family life, because I think that's important just to acknowledge like there's an awareness inside of us. Like we're observing like how people that talk and act like that, how we view them in our family or culturally, like that's kind of taught to be passed on to one another, and I think, I love how you talked about how your father was born in 1944 and acknowledging the world that he grew up in was not the world that we live in today, nor was the world that you and I grew up in as well, the world we live in today. And almost a desire to want to protect your children from somebody who was like that, which today I think we know better than that. But it's not contagious. It's nothing like that. We're not looking to spread anything here. It's just something that who I am. Knowing that, so Anthony and I, we know that you teach history, and you talked about you ended up then after being at Walmart going then to community college and continuing on in your education. Did you have something inside of you like story or desire to want to pursue history that kind of lit you up?
Yeah, absolutely. I first became interested in history when I started to research family history. And I think all of this was a desire to ground myself. I think I felt unanchored in life, and I needed somehow to find some grounding, some platform from which I could build my life. And for me, the logical means of finding that platform was to look back at that which brought me to the present, to the location I found myself in. So I really started my interest in American history specifically by looking at my family history, which I knew nothing about. We didn't keep our family history well, but I found so many interesting characters and people who died in the Civil War and all sorts of people that I didn't know about who had lived long before I came to be. And then I needed to place them in the larger American history. So I started naturally when I learned that a great-great-grandfather had died in the Civil War in 1862. Thankfully, a Union soldier. I then wanted to understand more about the Civil War and about that time period. So I moved on into the study of the larger picture of American history. I think part of the reason fundamentalist Christianity was so attractive to me is, one, I was born with a religious orientation, but two, I was also trying to find some stability and some grounding and some truth and some reality that would give me a place from which I could jump off to go out into the larger world. So American history, family history, religion, religious history, those were the areas in which I sought to find a whole way of confronting who I was ultimately. And then when I started to come out as a gay person, which didn't happen until college, I immediately went to LGBTQ history because I knew that these other types of history I'd studied gave me a sense of self and place. And so I looked then for gay history to also give me a sense of self and place as I struggled with that coming out process.
Rodney, when it's interesting when you were saying that you were building this foundation for your life, I remember, for myself after I came out, that this sort of idea of what my life, what my future was going to look like, it altered, it changed. Before I came out, I felt that I was going to, go to college, meet a woman, get married, have kids, have a job, that whole thing. That was sort of this story that I told myself. When you started discovering, especially like researching LGBTQ history, how did that start shifting that? Like, how did that facilitate that change in your perception of what your life was going to look like?
Well, I know that getting back a little bit to the 1970s and television, I know that when Anita Bryant came into our homes in 1977 with that Dade County vote that was so devastating, I was aware of that. That was hurtful. That harmed me. I think that harmed every LGBT person in this country. And then the next year, the Briggs Initiative in California, in which the people of California were quite literally voting about whether or not then gay and lesbian person could be a teacher. These were harmful to me. So when I started looking at LGBTQ history, I wanted to look far above and beyond those experiences from the 1970s that were harmful. And then I went back and I discovered, the Mattachine Society of 1950, the Daughters of Bilitis later in the 1950s, Stonewall in 1969, Harvey Milk, 1978, his assassination. All of these began to place me. Bayard Rustin, who organized the March on Washington in 1963, where Martin Luther King delivered that beautiful I Have a Dream speech. All of these wonderful people who were behind the scenes, in the shadows, present, but not really present. The light wasn't able to come upon them because they had this difference. They had to be, in the case of Bayard Rustin, a brother outsider, someone who wasn't really fully in the group as who he was. So all of that gave me power. I didn't know there was an LGBTQ history. I didn't know that there were people like me through all time, going all the way back. There have always been people who were like I am. Yeah. And absolutely that created a community, not only with the past, not only with the dead, but a community with those who were also still right now alive with me and struggling with me through many of the same circumstances from 10, 30, 50, 100 years ago.
It's interesting. I know, during my coming out process, being able to connect with LGBTQ history was really important for me to understand that not only was I not alone, but that people who are like me, my community, they did span, hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was, I know for myself, taking those LGBTQ history classes in college, it was really important. And I think it was also just being able to have those conversations intellectually with a professor and with your class. I know that really helped. My next thought is, so if you're researching, you're in college, when did you discover that you wanted to be a teacher?
I think I discovered that because I loved being a learner, and a learner loves to teach what they've learned. So probably halfway through that experience at Walmart, I decided that's not what I want to do. I love to learn too much, and I'm capable of learning. I was always a really good student in high school, and I decided if I'm going to do something, I want to do something, one, that's fulfilling for me, learning and teaching, and two, that helps contribute to the world. And the point you raised there a second ago, too, about understanding through the lens of history that we are part of a stream that's been flowing for a long time. Yeah. The same thing happened if you consider Black American history. You think of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the second African American to have a PhD at Harvard, the man who founded then called Negro History Week in 1926. He talked about, quote, the great theater of events in which Black people, Black Americans had found themselves, and how that theater of events and their contributions and their lives had been overlooked, considered unimportant, not relevant, not worthy of the academy. So he, as the father of Black history, as the creator of what became Black and African American History Month, he was trying to do that for his community, to give them a grounding, to give them a purpose, to give them people in the historical record and in the great flow of history, and thereby empowering their community, empowering and helping them identify with others who had gone through very similar struggles. I think the same is true of women's history, Native American history, lesbian and gay history.
Yeah, it also, as you were sort of, just talking through that, it also makes me think of, like, just even within my own family. I know Jeff could probably attest to this, getting to know my family more and more, but how important it is for the older folks within my family to sort of pass down the traditions and pass down these stories of, grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. I think when you know where you come from, it helps, shape where you're going. Shouldn't hold you back or stop you from doing anything. But I think it's definitely important to always be able to look backwards, to give you that grounding so that you can move forward and blossom.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's why from the beginning of my teaching career 30 years ago, I felt it was extremely important to help my students understand how vital the past was. And it's very difficult to do with young people. There's almost actually not a developmental process that's occurred yet for a young person to understand that the world didn't begin to exist the day they were born, that the world has been here for a long, long time. And a lot of people have lived on this planet, and they've loved and they've bled and they've had hopes and they've had dreams and tragedies, and they've rejoiced and they've suffered, and that they are now just born into this stream at this time and this place, and eventually they'll be washed away and a whole new group will come. Most people begin to really like history as they get older, as they age. Mm-hmm. So it's hard as a teacher to make it relevant and make it interesting and make it something that's pertinent to them. But I agree with you. There is power in history. And when we understand where we came from and why things are the way they are today, I think it is empowering. And it's also an act of political courage. Mm-hmm. It was for Carter Woodson an act of political courage, and for women and for LGBTQ people, it's an act of political courage to say we also have a story. We didn't just suddenly appear in 1969 at Stonewall. We were here for a long time before that.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned Anita Bryant earlier. I'd heard her name a little bit growing up, but I didn't realize the full history of the actual movement was called Save Our Children, which probably did more harm to LGBTQI children than anyone was ever aware of it, at this time in the 70s. But at the same time, and the history of that is that people in Southern Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, chose to speak up for those rights for the gay and lesbian community in South Florida, which then created a ripple effect throughout the rest of the country in that era that challenged policies and things like that. And at that point was really when the embedment of the evangelical church with Jerry Falwell, is my understanding, kind of took hostage of this issue that has been going on for the last 30, 40, 50 years. It's interesting to me just to see like how one action, one person's voice can cause a ripple effect in any situation, and to be aware of like, how I speak to people every day, like what I'm choosing, how I'm choosing to live my life, how that affects other people's lives. I'm curious to know, like for you, like you've been really close to your mom throughout the years, and at what point was it in college that you came out to your parents?
I started coming out in 1989 when I was 24, and I was at the State University in Cape Girardeau on the Mississippi River, the hometown of Rush Limbaugh, a very conservative place, because there was on campus GLSA, it was called Gay and Lesbian Student Association. It had been around for about 2 or 3 years prior to 1989, and they had an advertisement in the school newspaper with a P.O. box. So I wrote a letter to that P.O. box number 31, I still remember. And I said, I really need to talk to somebody. I need help with this issue. And they got the letter. They set me up with the faculty sponsor, and I met him, and then I started to meet other people. So that was in 1989. I didn't tell my mom the story until 1991. So a couple of years later, and I was already teaching then. I was living in St. Louis. I called her on the telephone, and I remember I said, Mom, I want you to be always involved in my life, and I want you to always know what's going on. So I have to tell you I'm gay. And her first sentence back to me was, son, I've known for years, because my mother's perceptive and she's smart and she knows me, and she and I think so much alike. So she had known for years, but that was the confirmation. It took her, 12 hours of a little bit of crying, a little bit of concern. You have to keep in mind, of course, the first AIDS case was diagnosed in 1981. One of my childhood friends, who was about 4 years or 3 years older than I was, who used to look after me when I was out in the yard playing, he had passed away from HIV AIDS in October of 1987. So my mom is afraid about what people might do to me. She's afraid about health risk. She's afraid about living in a society that's not friendly to LGBTQ people. But she became, and remains to this day, my staunchest defender and supporter. My dad took a little more time to get accustomed to the idea. In fact, when he informed my sister, he couldn't say the word gay. He spelled it to her. Your Rodney is G-A-Y. But he came around also because he was a good man and he loved me. And sadly, sometimes actually parents don't love their children in the way that allows them to accept their children for who their children are. Fortunately for me, my parents loved me in that way. And you're absolutely right in regard to Anita Bryant, to touch, unfortunately, on her for another second, because I wrote a paper about Carol Curitin, who was a pastor at the MCC church in St. Louis. She founded that church actually in 1973. Incredible woman. I wrote it when I was doing my graduate work in history. The night of the unfortunate and unhappy vote in Dade County, I believe it was November 1977, there was a meeting, a community meeting at the church for lesbian and gay St. Louisans. And fortunately, somebody audio taped that meeting, and I've listened to it. And there's no doubt that what happened there galvanized the LGBTQ community all across the country. And it was a wellspring of new activism and new activists, because we had been threatened, very seriously threatened. Save our children. That's a very scary campaign. Gay people should not be teachers. It's a very scary campaign. And she did help galvanize the movement, codify the fact that we were a community under attack. And you mentioned Jerry Falwell, of course, 1979, he founded the Moral Majority, which flirted with and then got in bed with the Republican Party and remains there to this day. Also in the 1970s, we were fighting the Equal Rights Amendment, a very simple, few words, 20 words or so we wanted to add to the Constitution to make it explicitly and forever clear that women in America are equal to men under the law. We couldn't get that included, and it's still not included in the Constitution. But you had the aftermath of Roe versus Wade. You had Dade County in 77. You had Jerry Falwell and moral majority in 79. So all of that baggage was carried by all of us in this community into the 1980s. And then the first AIDS diagnosis in 1981. So it was a very rough time.
Thanks for speaking to that, and specifically the history of it, Rodney, because I know a lot of this I didn't fully quite understand the depth and weight of really what took place at this time. So you took a trip to DC, to was it the Holocaust Museum? Was that?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
And can you talk about what that experience was, and was there a light bulb or an aha moment that took place during that trip?
Yes, I was very fortunate that my school district had a very strong local union that was affiliated with the Missouri National Education Association and the National Education Association, and also very lucky that the NEA has been on the forefront of human rights movements and progressive advancements for many, many decades. And they began in the 1990s to sponsor various groups for educators to come to Washington, D.C., and to talk about issues that were confronting LGBTQ kids in K through 12 schools and also LGBTQ teachers. So I went to a couple of these conferences. They were empowering, of course. I was not yet out at my high school, certainly not to any student, and only to the other gay and lesbian teachers who were on the campus, but they were not out. They were older than I was. I was the youngest one at the time. And I did go to the National Holocaust Memorial Museum, which had only recently opened, and it was, of course, meaningful, deeply meaningful. And while I was there, I purchased a poster that had some of the various patches that various criminal ones under the Nazi regime were forced to wear, like Jehovah's Witnesses and the Purple Triangle, of course, the Star of David for Jews, and the Pink Triangle for homosexuals, and many other. They imprisoned all sorts of individuals, although it was primarily of course, the target of their hatred was the Jewish people. And I brought that poster back with me to my high school because I wanted my students to see it. I wanted them to be aware. It was in the spring, so we had rolled around to World War II and the aftermath in this junior American history course. And it was at that point, yes, that I decided I can't be in the closet anymore on the job. I can't stand up in front of students and not be authentically who I am, because that makes me a less efficient and less wise teacher. And so I used that lesson that we were already learning in that class as a way to say, and to make it real. They call it a teachable moment, to say, if I had been there at the time, perhaps under paragraph 175 of the German Penal Code, I might have been arrested. I might have been put in a prison camp or a prison and had to wear a pink triangle. Yeah. So that was the way in which I let my students know that I was a gay man who had been teaching in that school at that point. It was my fourth year. Yeah, you said teachable moment, and to me, it's almost I hear that and I totally resonate. And then, but also, I'm feeling is that you had a human moment with your students. Sometimes when we read about these things in the book, these book history books or these stories, we hear about people getting their heads cut off, like back, let them eat cake like that, and we joke around about it, but just like how malicious and obviously but to pay note that the Holocaust was a horrible tragedy, and that there are still people today that want to say that it didn't exist, and we know that we're doomed to repeat ourselves if that happens. I remember when I saw La Caja Falls for the first time, and it was really my first education on what took place as well with the pink triangles during the concentration camps. But then
with you being there in front of your students, making it real and personable and human, giving a face to that. And they had already had time with you. This was, I believe, I remember reading, this was was this in January?
This was in March 22nd, 1994.
Okay. So they had already had that previous school year to develop a relationship with you leading up to this moment, right?
That's correct.
And this was high school. So what age were these kids?
These students would have been 16 or 17. It was a junior American history class. And you're right. They had been with me since at least around Labor Day. I had been in that school for 3 full school years prior to that year. I had a good rapport with students. I had good working relationship with my colleagues in the administration. I cared about my students. I really felt it was a calling to stand in front of them and give them information that they didn't know about and to help shape them and mold them and make them good citizens and good people. And I think they knew that I cared about them and that I was a good and decent person. And now I had simply revealed another facet of my personality and of my reality to them.
Rodney, do you think, looking back upon you telling your students or, showing them who you are, were you afraid? Was there any fear in making that statement to them?
There must have been some, but I don't recall that there was a large amount of fear about it because it had come to the point that it simply had to be done. 1994, that October was going to be the first annual, then we called it Lesbian and Gay History Month. I had sent out the proposal about establishing October as History Month in January, and I knew that there would be some attention about this event because we were beginning to get endorsements from all the various national lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans organizations at the time and educational groups. So I felt it was really important that I control the story, that it not control me. Also, I felt it was the responsible act of a teacher to not allow a rumor mill of innuendo and secondhand stories to filter down to my students and give them discomfort and to make them wonder and to make them feel I wasn't being authentic with them. So I really felt it was the correct act of a teacher pedagogically. And also I think anytime we say who we are, it's a righteous act. It's a righteous deed. So my students, gratefully, overwhelmingly, not everyone, but overwhelmingly, students were very receptive and very kind. And the school year, frankly, continued largely as it had through the rest of 1994. And then over summer of 94, things began to bubble and there were some school board meetings that were problematic. But largely, I was able to walk through it without fear or anxiety. I think actually in some ways when I look back on some of the news accounts of that day, which I hadn't done for about 25 years until 2 summers ago, I think it gives me more anxiety now to review that period than it gave me at that time. And that could just be in some sense a function of age. It's easier to get anxious when you're 55 than when you're 29.
Yeah, I also think about sort of when I was younger and when I felt compelled to come out to people or tell them that I was gay, there was almost that sort of anxious kind of feeling inside before that happened. But like you said, at that time, I felt that I had to do that because I needed to be seen as who I was. I wanted people to know that, yes, I am, I'm Anthony, I'm a person, but I'm also gay. And you need to know that there's a gay person that you're interacting with. I can remember, being anxious about that. We're also talking about back, in the 90s. It was not it just was not as well talked about yet. I mean, I feel like even just thinking about media on television, who were our role models? I'm pretty sure that in '94, Ellen DeGeneres didn't, she had a sitcom back then. She hadn't come out on the show yet. So I feel like that whole snowball of, media representation, of being able to see queer characters on TV, that really didn't start till the end of the 90s. So there's a lot of importance in being able to have people see you for who you truly are. I also think that there has to be something said about what you said about your rapport with your students. I feel like listening over the last couple weeks to a couple different podcasts. One of them was on the Khan Institute, the founder of the Khan Institute. They do educational videos, and what they have found is that there's the same teachers have to do the educational or instructional videos because the students create a rapport with a teacher. So I totally hear you if you were not directing the narrative, there would have been a lack of trust, and probably that would have hurt the students more, it sounds like, than having them hear that you're a gay man.
Additionally, of course, there were LGBTQ students, and what a disservice to them.
For sure.
If I continued to keep this secret and I allowed it to come out through the rumor mill as something nasty and bad and dirty. So I had an obligation to those students as much as I had an obligation to my straight students to make certain they understood. And you mentioned coming out, and you're right. When we don't, and each person must come out when it's right for them, and we're all on our own journey and we're all at a different place, but we can get stuck in our emotional, psycho-emotional, psychosexual development. We can get stuck if we come to that door, the closet door, we could say, and if we don't open it, we remain stuck and inhibited, and our potential for growth is so much diminished. Not only growth with that relationship or that friendship or with our families, but our own innate growth. So it's vital. And the good news is things are so much better today. It does get better.
Yep.
And I see these young people, they absolutely astound me and amaze me how open they are. Now, they're still suffering.
Yep.
There are still families that are not accepting. There are still homeless LGBTQ young people who were removed from their homes. We still have a lot of work to do, but we have made great strides.
Just for everyone who's listening, after this happened, after Rodney came out to his class, there was a little bit of a media frenzy, if you want to use that word. There was definitely a lot of attention or eyes sort of on you being a gay teacher, and also coming out to your class. At that time, did you ever have the foresight to see that it was going to, like, the situation that happened in your classroom, you coming out to your students? Did it ever dawn on you that it would make national news?
It did not. I didn't think that far ahead, but I did come, though, fairly quickly to recognize that my job would be saved, because at that point, the fourth year, I wasn't tenured yet. That would happen at the end of the fifth year, which gives you a lot more stability in terms of job and job rights. So I did, though, come very quickly to recognize I needed the union behind me, the local and the state and the National Education Association, and they were behind me. The Missouri NEA provided an attorney for me. I also knew that it was a very good thing that I had an impeccable record. In fact, I remember the first year I taught, my vice principal over the social studies department wanted to nominate me as the new teacher of the year for the district. And I said, I just don't have time for that. But my record was impeccable. I'd always done what I was supposed to do. And then thirdly, I was aware that having a spotlight on the situation helps, because people will do awful things more likely if they think no one will notice. So when I was first contacted by Jeanette Batts, who's a wonderful writer, then with the Riverfront Times, which was an alternative and is an alternative newspaper in St. Louis, and I don't know how she learned about the story, and she and I recently reminisced trying to figure that out, and we can't recall. But when she contacted me, I, a little bit reluctantly at first, but not for very long, because I recognized this is how they'll know that what they end up doing to me will get attention. So the attorney, my record, and having the free press nosing around in the situation, I think were all three vital elements of what helped me maintain my job the next year, to be granted tenure, and then I stayed 2 additional years after that as well.
I hear it time and time again, especially on this show and just in life in general. But I heard what you just said in terms of being heard, being seen. And when you're in a marginalized group, it's just always important to not be afraid of who you are, to stand up for yourself and to be able to be seen. Because when you do that, that's how you inspire other people who are out there watching or listening. I just think it's commending you that you had that foresight to be able to see that that's the importance of doing that. It wasn't about fame and fortune or, celebrity, having your 5 minutes of fame or anything like that. It was really to be able to to talk to the press so that your voice could be heard and that you were able to, direct the narrative.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. It does help with directing the narrative instead of having the narrative direct you.
To me, it's interesting to know that there was a network that was behind you, that was not just behind you when you coming out, but you were with forming LGBT History Month. Did you feel at that point, or looking back upon it, like it almost kind of like when a surgeon's in the middle of surgery and they ask for the scalpel or they ask for this, like the person's there to give them the tool that they need for the next action? Can you look back on life and kind of see like any instance in that where like things kind of fell into place for like your mission, for lack of better?
Well, that's a good question. Certainly 1994 was an eventful and exhausting year, because it did culminate around the founding of History Month with, I never want to neglect saying, with helpers like John Du Bois and Kevin Booyer and Kevin Jennings and Jessica Greenman and Tori Wilson, the people that came with me to form that first coordinating committee, Gerberhardt Library, GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Teachers Network, it was then called, now Education Network. These people, I sent out the proposal and they came on board, and we formed a committee, and we just started doing our job without an internet. I didn't even have an email address in 1994 till late in the year. And then the coming out happened in May, or in March. So yeah, 1994 was an odd and unusual year. That October was the first annual LGBTQ History Month. I'm teaching full time. I'm working on a graduate degree in history. The Dateline NBC episode aired on October the 4th. Teacher magazine came out at the same time. And now I look back and I don't understand how I had the energy and the stamina actually to get through 1994. But again, at 29, you can do a lot of things.
True. And just to, like you said, Dateline NBC, I just kind of got flashbacks. Like to anybody who's not familiar, Dateline NBC was, and I honestly don't think there's quite a media, maybe 60 Minutes today would be the closest thing I can think of. But we didn't, there wasn't as many, there wasn't streaming, there wasn't Netflix, there was, we had cable then, but still for like your spotlight for the week of what was happening in the United States or the world, like that was where everyone turned into Jane Pauley, and she's from Indiana where I'm from. And that was where, and so to have, that's a big deal to be on that show. And people can go back still today, and you can watch the segment that aired your story. So I'm curious, like, and I you know, I've talked about this, Rodney, is like I've watched that video of you where you're speaking, and I don't know if you're answering who and what you were answering to exactly, whether it was the press or a school board, but there's footage of you, and you are sitting there very at peace. You know, I like to use the word, you're neither cocky nor afraid in those moments that I watch you speak on Dateline NBC. Was there something else besides these people? Where did you draw your strength from? And if you don't know, it's a fair answer as well too.
I appreciate the phrase you use, because I don't want to be a cocky person, and I don't want to be a person who's fearful. So I appreciate the phrase, and it is a very meaningful way to put it. I think I got strength from, one, I have my mother's personality of perseverance, and that you just keep pushing through and you get through what you have to get through. The largest influence on my life philosophy was Martin Luther King. And I had studied his life quite intimately and read everything he had ever written, listened to every speech I could find. And he was a great inspiration. I was, of course, quite religious at the time. And even to this day, I think 90% of everything Jesus said is pretty cool and would transform the world, even if you dismiss from it all of the supernatural aspects, the way Thomas Jefferson did with the Jefferson Bible, when he cut out all the miraculous parts and kept the morals and the teachings of Jesus. So I think probably that would be where I got that energy. And I think, too, when a person is walking in truth, to the best of their ability to discern the truth, that's empowering, because you believe you're on the right side of the narrative, and that the story is ultimately coming in your direction. And, Martin Luther King used to talk about the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And when you're walking in what you believe is truth, you believe that the arc of justice is going to eventually bend in your direction.
Wow, that's really helpful. Thanks for, that just reminds me, like, because, I've seen the people that have come up through history that have done amazing things, but to really model after the peace and the love and the message that came, the unwavering with Martin Luther King. And the little bit of education I had on him in school, we talk about the March on Washington, and I didn't realize, and up until even recently, that, how many years, was it like 13 years that he did his work? It wasn't just, it didn't just happen all at once. It was building up over that 13-year period. Is that, correct me if I'm wrong, does that sound about right?
That's right. The Montgomery bus boycott began in December of 1955. He was a new preacher in town, and they recruited him to head up the Montgomery Improvement Association. So in 1956, he came fully into the consciousness of America, and he was assassinated in April of 1968. So it was a 13-year period in which the country turned its eyes to Martin Luther King. And he's so much more than the I Have a Dream speech, as wonderful and inspiring as it is. I mean, I would ask everybody, go to YouTube and type in, Martin Luther King and Vietnam War speech, which he gave on, I believe, April 4th of 67, precisely 1 year to the day before he was assassinated. I mean, there's not a more magnificent piece of oratory that we have on audio tape probably than Martin Luther King explaining why he opposed the Vietnam War. And of course, that put him at odds with a lot of mainstream and moderate white people who had come around on civil rights. But he began to talk about war, and he began to talk about poverty. And so he was challenging the economic might of the country, and he was challenging the military might of the country, and expressing how all of the expenditures on the Vietnam War, which was probably America's biggest foreign policy debacle ever, how that was taking away from President Johnson's war on poverty and Great Society. So yeah, Martin Luther King, I mean, he died at age 39, so he lived such a short life, yet he was able to see a beloved community that did not yet exist. And he, as long as he had breath, he brought people toward that community. And we can find the same in people in the women's movement, Native American movement, LGBTQ movement, people who, Harvey Milk comes to mind, people who can see the world as it should be and as it will be, and they can begin to take steps and help others come along with them to take steps toward that future to hasten its arrival.
Well said. It brought me back to this image. I'm from South Bend, Indiana. Reverend Theodore Hesburgh was the president of the University of Notre Dame for a good while. He passed away a couple of years ago. There's an image that comes to my mind of Father Ted with Martin Luther King locked arms in arms during a protest, a civil rights protest in the 1960s. And just to kind of bring it current, this week, the Pope came out in favor of civil unions. And
I was very surprised to see that. That is a small yet huge step for the Universal Catholic Church. And it was, Pope Francis I surprises us often. Occasionally we don't like what he says, but often we do. He's certainly a big improvement over Benedict XVI, his predecessor. But blessed are the white people who stood with Martin Luther King. Blessed are the straight people who stand with LGBTQI Americans. Blessed are those men who stand with feminism and women's rights. Those are the ones. I think of William Lloyd Garrison, who was a white man in the 1830s and a good friend of Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist. Blessed are men like William Lloyd Garrison, who can see the world as it should be 100 years before it would ever even begin to get there.
Yeah, it's, I hear your voice and you're just like, I'm hearing the St. Francis prayer, in my mind right now, in my soul. It's like, I grew up in the church and there's been just like a lot of relationships that have been healed. I just have to actually pause and be like, I learned a lot of wonderful, good things about how to treat people, how to treat myself. And then there was this moment where that just kind of like there was a cliff where I realized that, during the AIDS pandemic became a real conversation that not a lot of people wanted to have that I was around, but when it did, it was not in good context. Some of these things that I learned as a child, these little things that my grandmother would tell me, like, do unto others as you would do to yourself, those timeless things maybe that of how to treat other humans, other spirits, that I've been able to make kind of take the good and leave the bad, if that makes any sense, and how I go about and live my life today. I don't pretend to know like where you at, and technically, it's not really, honestly, it's not fair for me to ask, but like today with you, my understanding is you have a master's in history and in religion as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So, with your own personal practice today, like, would you mind talking about like what that's like for you today?
I think religion is a powerful force, and it has a lot of energy, and that is why we have to handle it so gently and carefully, because it can be a force for good and it can be a force for ill. In Martin Luther King's case, of course, he always called upon the gospel, called upon the teachings of Jesus, and he was able to transform the world. You look at some other, Pat Robertson comes to mind, Jerry Falwell comes to mind. They call upon the unhappy angels of our nature, and they use their religion to sort of proclaim that the people they don't like are the same people God doesn't like. In my own life, I truly was born with a religious orientation. And interestingly, my parents were not religious people. They would have believed in God, of course, but they weren't religious. They never took me or my sister to church. The first time I was ever in a church with my parents is when I took them when I was 16 years old. So it was just something, a natural inclination on my part, and I got a lot of good energy from it. And then became a fundamentalist Christian for about 5 years until I was 21. And then slowly I moved into moderate and then liberal form of Christianity. Today, I'm agnostic about a lot of the details. In fact, probably most of the details. But I'm hopeful that there's an energy, a force a power, even a supernatural being that ultimately will wrap up all of our stories in love and in light and in compassion and in grace and in mercy and fix everything in the end. There's no evidence to me that at this point that force or energy is actively fixing things. We're doing it ourselves. That's what humanism is. You fix human problems. But I'm hopeful that there is some energy that will ultimately envelop us. And I still get very inspired by, listening to an occasional gospel hymn or listening to some of my favorite contemporary Christian singers from the 1980s and early 1990s. So it's still part of me, and my spirit still percolates up often, and I feel awe and I feel inspiration. And I believe that, if we love one another and if we're kind to one another, and if we look at 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, love does not get easily angered, and so on. I think these are transformative principles that are applicable to any religious orientation or devotion to any religion or philosophy.
I heard someone say the other day that when it comes to life, that they're constantly reminded, what would love look like in this situation? I know for myself, that I just have to keep it simple. When I start to become a little fundamentalist about how I think somebody else should be living their lives, that I've probably got to look at my plate and see what I'm working with. So yeah, I appreciate that. Anthony, I'm sorry, I think you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah. Hearing your journey, Rodney, through your faith, I don't think I've ever been able to see it this way, is that your faith is a journey. And I hear, so many times, and I'm one of those people who was born and raised, Catholic. And when all of a sudden the Catholic teachings weren't right for me, I sort of, ditched the faith, so to speak, or ditched the religion, and never really found another avenue to, harness or sort of move those teachings that I've learned growing up and in high school and in college, but never was really able to sort of move those into a newer space. And it's just interesting. I've never quite heard anyone talk about their faith journey that way. And I really appreciate that, because there's many times where I miss, some of the positive things about being in a faith community. But it's, I guess, just like anything else in life, we grow and we change, and how you practice and what that looks like should change and shift as well. So thanks for that.
Yeah, we're constantly pruning our lives in terms of who we are friends with, or what we like to do, or what we're interested in, or what has meaning. It's a constant evolutionary process on an individual level as we find those parts that just aren't working anymore, and we prune them out. We find those parts that are working well, and we give them, a little bit of nourishment so they're working even better. But we're all truly, we're all here together in this time and this place on this planet under these circumstances. And of course, 2020 has been unusually difficult for all of us. And we're all hopefully trying our best to do our best and be our best. And we can take from everyone who's taught us, teachers, religions, schools, culture, entertainment, books, we can take the best from that, take that which makes us better people, and then leave behind that which doesn't.
Yeah. That's and what you just said there just really echoes in my experience as I've gotten a little bit older is that if we can take the best from all of us, because the story's not over, right? We're bending, we're constantly improving. Once I stopped looking at the world as that this is just as it is, versus I get to enter into creation and be part of creation, that the world is being pruned towards to be a better place for everyone. I realized that if that's going to happen, we need all of us for that. And and I guess where I would, Anthony and I were talking before this, you and some really wonderful people came together, in the 90s to help form LGBTQ History Month. And specifically, I just want to touch on a little history, is that my understanding was the month of October was chosen for a couple different reasons. One for National Coming Out Day, and the other two was that in 1979, 1987, there had been marches as well. Is that correct?
That's right. When I was putting together the proposal, I looked at the calendar. I eliminated months like February, Black History Month, March, Women's History Month. And then I recognized the 1979 March on Washington was in October. The 1987 March was in October on the 11th. The next year, 1988, National Coming Out Day on the 11th. October was in the academic calendar. June is a great month to celebrate what happened at Stonewall and all of the various pride events we have around the country that also include thankfully, a lot of history, but June is not within the academic calendar. So my thought at the time, and then the thought of the initial board for the History Month, was that we want this to be a secondary, 9 through 12th grade and post-secondary and community event. And if it's going to be part of the school system, it has to be within the academic calendar. So all of those bits and pieces were part of the reason I felt it seemed right to pick October as the occasion for the month.
So after the proposal was approved or was well received by other folks, what was the first step in making LGBTQ History Month for that first October in 1994?
Right. The endorsements were the foundation. National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, GLAAD, GLSEN, some organizations that aren't still here, endorsements by historians and well-known people in the community. That was the foundation. Then we put together a little packet, $5 packet. We'd send it out in the mail. It included some thoughts on History Month, why it's important, historical figures, where you can get more resources, a couple of books that would be helpful, like Becoming Visible, which was a reader in gay and lesbian history by Kevin Jennings, who I'd recruited onto our board. So that would go out to people. But the idea was that it would be a very decentralized occasion, that eventually people would just remember, October is LGBT History Month, and colleges and universities would pick up on that and begin to do programming around it, and they do. I in October I often Google LGBTQ History Month because I want to see what's going on in colleges and universities. I was on the Penn State website yesterday, and they've got about 40 events happening at their primary campus and their satellite campuses, and that's extraordinary. And then also I saw yesterday in Lee County, Florida, Fort Myers area, there was some people in the community who had proposed that the school board issue a proclamation for LGBTQ History Month, and the board refused to do so. So it's still something that's not having the impact we would like everywhere, because some school districts, and we have a very decentralized system of education in this country where local school boards have the primary decision-making capacity. And if they're not interested, it's very difficult to get anything in that school. But that first year also, Oregon and Massachusetts governors issued a proclamation for October 1994. We've never had a federal proclamation. If the election on November 3 goes the way I'm hoping it goes, maybe next October we could get the first official federal proclamation for History Month.
I know with the state of Illinois where we're at currently, last year Governor Pritzker signed in the LGBT inclusive curriculum bill that took effect that's this year now, with Illinois being the fourth state, I believe, second in California, Colorado, New Jersey, to implement the law that Oregon had passed, similar as well too. And so I think sometimes it's like to just for me, it's like to understand that history is still how this is building up. This ripple that was started in 94 is still reverberating here today. And also, Anthony, you had we were talking about also like internationally as well too.
Sure. I mean, what we could see and with the information available, it looks like countries like Australia, Hungary, Greenland, Brazil, Canada, and in the UK, they all celebrate LGBTQ history. So it's it's got to be a good thing for you to be able to see that, this one idea, this idea that you had, it's taken a global effect.
Yeah, it's deeply meaningful. Of course, it's very moving, and most of those places do choose October. But here's a curious story: in the United Kingdom, October was already celebrated as Black History Month. So when LGBTQ History Month, the idea went to the United Kingdom, Sue Sanders was the person who implemented. She works for Schools Out UK, and she implemented LGBTQ History Month there. And interestingly, next week, she and I we've decided we're going to have a YouTube conversation where we each talk about why we did what we did. But she started it there in 2005, February. So 11 years after it started here, it moved to the UK. And it's very meaningful. It's very refreshing. It's humbling. It makes me feel good. It makes me believe that, I've made a wee little mark that might outlive me.
Yeah, I would say it's a pretty big mark that is going to continue for many years to come.
I hope that it does. I definitely do, because I do think it's so important that young people get a full panorama of the history of the human race, the human family, of the American story, and of the various groups that inhabit this planet with us. So I hope that it grows and grows, and more colleges and universities and secondary schools do more programming around October.
Yeah, I think I think with the generation coming up now that's in school, it seems like they're way more receptive than past generations to people who are different from them. It almost is something where it looks like it doesn't even faze them that someone is, within the LGBTQI community, or if someone is different skin color, different, practices different religion. So I definitely see, I could see in the future that it being very well received.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so refreshing, truly, what the young people are doing everywhere.
With the work you've done has caused visibility. It's caused it's created a space for people to have those conversations in the homes. It's not just from that one show on PBS, and we all build on each other. I believe that, this is just my personal belief, I believe that there is a direct correlation with something being familiar and known versus fear. Couldn't think of any better way to create visibility and to have a safe space for these conversations than to take place earlier in education, in 7th or 8th grade, when we're learning about, the history of our country. I'm so grateful now that there's more women's history, that there's African American history. Now to this day, we're learning more about Indigenous people history, that we're all having a space at the table. And I think that we're so much richer and better for it when we all get to come together and celebrate one another that way. And I just really get excited, and I have so much gratitude for people like yourself. I know you've been very humble, and we've been giving you a couple of compliments, but we do sincerely appreciate everything you've done and continue to do. You've written a book. You've written numerous articles for the HuffPost that have been really engaging. That I've really enjoyed seeing. We're going to be sure. On your profile page to make sure we point to all that literature and resources so everyone else can benefit from some of the things we've benefited from getting to know you better, Rodney. Anthony, I feel like I've talked a little bit here. I'm going to give you a little space. So
Rodney, just echoing what Jeff said, I can't thank you enough for having the courage or the drive or the determination to do what you did. Being, in school myself, back in the 90s, and not knowing there was something different about me, but not knowing what it was, and being able to look back and see and understand those people who were not afraid to stand up and be who they were and create that visibility in the world is helped lead us to where we are today, to help lead us to this generation not really caring about our differences. So for all of us, just thank you for the work that you've done. It's really, really appreciated.
thank you both. Very kind. I've enjoyed the conversation very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things with you. I know you'll put the link up for the documentary short Taboo Teaching, but anybody can just Google Taboo Teaching and my name and they can find it for free on YouTube. And it covers a lot of those events from 1994 and 95. So that's out there for them. But I appreciate very much the chance to speak with you and to speak with your audience. This has been a privilege and a wonderful, energizing conversation for me. So thank you both.
Oh, thank you so much, Rodney. We really appreciate it.
Rodney has contributed to various sources, including the Huffington Post and The Advocate, discussing the importance of LGBTQI plus history. You can also see various television interviews Rodney has done discussing his experience in coming out to his students. He's also written a book, Killing God: Christian Fundamentalism and the Rise of Atheism. All of these articles and video links are available on our website under Rodney's Talk Out Loud profile page, along with his book, which is available in our bookstore. Jeff and I recommend that you take some time to read through his work, and you'll see how important understanding LGBTQI plus history truly is. We said it already, but it's worth saying again. Rodney, thank you for having the courage to talk out loud as you've helped pave the way for so many others. And thank you for being with us for the 26th anniversary of LGBT History Month. Thanks for listening to this episode of Talk Out Loud. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, rate us, and share with a friend. You can also follow us on social media at Talk Out Loud Live. If you or someone you know has an inspirational story and a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on our website at www.talkoutloudlive.com. You can also get your official Talk Out Loud gear in our online store. Thanks again for listening, and remember to be true, be you, and to talk out loud.